I'm going to tell you a story about courage, struggle, and happy endings. This is my family's story. It starts in Laos in 1977. After the 20-year-long conflict known as the Vietnam War, Southeast Asia suffered through a dreadful refugee crisis.
Although the Laotians want the Americans out, there were problems for the first group trying to get on the charter flight.
The new government in Laos was hunting for the anti-communist rebels. My grandfather was a member and was on their list, so he fled the country and swam across the Mekong River. It is one of the deadliest rivers on the planet and almost a kilometer wide. At the time, the government was also conscripting boys as young as 9 for the army. My grandmother was left behind with 4 young boys, ages 7, 5, 3, and 1. My dad was 3. She decided to sell everything they had for a chance of a boat ride across the Mekong. When the day came, they met a man down by the river and gave him the money he was promised. They pushed off into the darkness, but they were being hunted. Searchlights scanned the water. They heard gunshots. 12 people suppressed their screams. The boat rocked. Babies cried. The water inched up their ankles, and then they finally reached the shores of Thailand. It looked like heaven on earth after a nightmare. But the nightmare continued with a night in jail, and then a cramped ride to the nearest refugee camp.
The buses and trucks were allowed to enter the compound.
In the Kiasa camp, my grandparents found each other. They lived in Nong Khai for 3 years. With my family enduring malnutrition and arsonist attacks, my grandfather decided to apply for sponsorship as refugees. They were devastated when they were rejected by the United States, a country that promised to take them in.
So it's obvious the Americans have worn out their welcome in Laos.
But then, the town of St. Pierre-Jolie, Manitoba, opened their arms to 6 starving refugees. They all expected their struggle would end there. But with the promise of safety came the overwhelming expectations to assimilate into the ways of the French Canadians. The boys in particular had it hard. Whether they were running from the wrath of the school's nuns or taking slurs and punches from the 6th grade boys, finding refuge took on a whole other meaning. Adding to the adversity was my parents' relationship. They met in high school and found strength in their differences. They became each other's home. Being an interracial couple in Steinbach in the 90s brought many challenges, particularly when they got married and opened a restaurant together. The town had a difficult time accepting them. They had no support. They were on the verge of bankruptcy, and the restaurant only lasted a year before they were forced to close it down. Rumors and a subtle boycott by the town resulted in a career change and a move to Winnipeg, which opened a door for better things to come. 40 years have passed, and Canada has shaped and nurtured my family, allowing us to thrive and blossom. We have grown in numbers. Today there are 14 descendants, from kids to grandkids, and now 1 great-grandkid. But our ties all lead back to that riverbank in Laos, and the perseverance of 6 refugees. Although I did not experience this personally, I still identify with the story because it helps me define my origins. Our ethnicities should not define who we are as people, but I still think it's important to have pride in where you come from. Just as we should honor those who struggled, we should also recognize those who are gracious enough to open up their hearts and look out for complete strangers. With that being said, there is a real issue concerning aid for refugee families. If my family had not received the support that they did, who knows where we'd all be, or if any of us would be here at all. The reality is that not all refugee families get a happy ending, like my family did. We need to stay mindful of each other's experiences and practice compassion, because we don't always know their stories, or where they've been.